is now my pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Trenton H. from Redlands. Thank you.
Wow. Nice. I like that. That's funny. Hi, everybody. My name is Trenton, and I'm an alcoholic. That's a nice touch. I like that. It's really good to be here tonight. Thank you for the warm welcome. What a great group. It's really good to be here. I want to thank my sweetheart, Georgia, for driving up with me. We had a great little road trip coming up, and I believe it's always an honor and a privilege to participate in the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. So thank you, Scott, for the invitation. And it's funny, a side note, when Scott, I had never met Scott. We have a lot of mutual friends, and when he called me a few months ago to speak up here, we ended up on the phone for a half an hour, instant friends, and I love that. And then we've had the chance to talk more, and we saw Scott last week or a couple weeks ago, and it's really great. It's really great. And then I want to thank Matthew, my sponsor, for coming and joining us tonight. And if you're new, welcome. Welcome to this life-saving, life-changing place. And congratulations to the chip takers and the birthdays. Again, it's really, really good to be here. So I'm asked to share in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today. So in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to get drunk, burn my life to the ground, and get sober and on the road of happy destiny. Hopefully that happens by the time I'm done. And I'll give you the essentials and get those out of the way. I've got a sponsor, Matthew M. I've got a home group, which is the Inland Group. We meet in Redlands on Monday nights at 7:30. If you're ever in the area, I have no idea why you'd want to be, but if you're ever passing through Redlands on your way to somewhere better, stop by and see us. We'd love to have you, and you'll find a great group of people that will welcome you. And last but not least, on October 4th, 2006, I was given the greatest gift that a guy like me could ever hope for, and that's, of course, my sobriety date. By no means is that my first sobriety date, but I pray to God that it's my last. So I come from a broken home. My parents got divorced when I was 2 months old. I was raised in a trailer park. Are there any other trailer park kids here? None. Nobody. You just won't admit it. Oh, thank you. I feel a little better when there's someone else in the room that gets it. I did not like the trailer park. And really, the trailer park was not good, but it was really the condition of the trailer that I grew up in. It was a single-wide trailer, not a modular home, mobile home trailer. And it was in disrepair, and it was filthy dirty. And sometimes the electricity would get shut off and stay off for periods of time, and it was filthy. And we didn't have dinner on the table. Like my friends would have to go home at 5 o'clock to eat dinner. We didn't have that. And so I grew up with a lot of shame about the way that we lived, and I always had that deep sense of loneliness. I don't know where that comes from, but I always felt like I was on the outside looking in, and I felt separate from, and I looked around and it seemed like everybody else had a mom and a dad, and I didn't. I just had a mom. My perception, I'm sure there were plenty of others, and everybody seemed to have nicer cars, nicer shoes, and everything seemed better for everybody else. And I just had this deep sadness and separate, anxious apartness, like our literature talks about. And I longed for this relationship with my dad. I would go long periods of time without hearing from my dad. And I always wanted a relationship with him, but that was not a popular thing to say in my house. He was the enemy, and I had to pretend that he was the enemy. And so I struggled with that a lot. And I tell you that because when I was 13 years old, I found the solution to all of it. I found that first drink. And for me, it was magic. When I had that first drink, all I wanted was more. Just give me more. And the book says that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. I don't like it, man. I am in love with it. I love the effect produced by alcohol. It solved every problem I'd ever had. Within a couple of drinks, it didn't matter how long it had been since my dad showed up for a visit or what kind of shoes I was wearing. It solved it all. And so from that day on, I was drunk constantly. I would drink anything I could get my hands on, including things like vermouth, cooking sherry, mouthwash, cough syrup, you name it, I drank it. Anything to give me that sense of ease and comfort that the book perfectly describes, sense of ease and comfort. And I remember times being like, I think I was like 14, 15 years old. I remember standing in my bathroom drinking shots of NyQuil, chasing it with Listerine. social drinking. Some people call that desperation. I call it happy hour, man. And I was drunk all the time. I couldn't stand the way I felt sober, and I found the solution. And so right away, my mom was concerned, and she's trying to get me to go to treatment and telling me I'm an alcoholic. And I'm like, Mom, I'm 13. I didn't think it was possible. And so I've got this problem at home. She's constantly on me. She's coming home and finding me passed out on the couch on a daily basis, and I'm just not doing well. I don't drink well. I never have. And so I said this wasn't my first sobriety date. I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous just before my 17th birthday. And specifically what was going on at the time, I'd had a couple of run-ins with the cops, underage drinking, drunk in public. I'd had a couple of girlfriends break up with me, and the only thing they said is, "You're drunk every time I see you." And already at that age, 15, 16 years old, if you get between me and a drink, then you got to go. And I had gotten kicked out of my high school for drinking Boone's Farm out of my locker one too many times. And so things were really bad. And on a Saturday morning, like I said, it was just before my 17th birthday. I had been drinking all morning, and I took my mom's car out and I wrecked it. And I came about this close to running right through somebody's bedroom. And instead I hit their fence and went into their backyard. So to get the heat off, and for no other reason, I agreed to go to treatment that day. And it's the only thing I could come up with. My mom had been trying to get me to go to treatment for a long time, and that was the only thing I could come up with. And so I was checked into Redlands Hospital that night into an adolescent treatment program. And within a few days, they put us in those white vans and they brought me to meet you. And I am incredibly grateful they brought me to meet you. I didn't know it at the time, but unfortunately I had a lot of years of drinking ahead of me, but I started hearing the music in Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard the solution, and I liked meetings. I always liked them. I wasn't crazy about the God and the steps and sponsor you, like everything AA is, but I liked the meetings. I liked sitting in your meetings, and they would take us mostly to participation meetings, and I would be the first guy to share. I had a lot to share. I think I had my hand up walking in the door, and I would use my shares would be things like little bits of your story I heard at the meeting yesterday, and some lyrics to a song I heard on the way to the meeting. Complete nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Didn't have a sponsor, hadn't worked a step, and I would take up half the meetings with my share. And I share that because I hear a lot of people talk about their experience when they were new, and they have an experience that was different than mine. The people were always kind to me. And I think it's important, at least it was for me. If they wouldn't have been kind to me, I don't know that I would have come back here. And I would share those ridiculous shares, and they would clap. And they would tell me to keep coming back. And I hear other people, and I'm not here to dispute what someone else's experience was, but no one told me to sit down and shut up. No one thumped me on the chest or called me names. They clapped and said to keep coming back. And I am so grateful for that, because over the years, I would desperately need to come back here. And I always knew that this was a safe place that I could come, and they would treat me kindly. And I am so grateful that that's my experience. While I was in that treatment center, they had a lot of suggestions. I'm sure you're familiar, get a book, get a sponsor, work the steps. My personal favorite, no relationships in the first year. I was like, when I heard that, I was just like, somebody shoot me. I mean, I'm 17, now you've taken away the booze, and now you're taking the girls away. Shoot me. And so, of course, within about 30 days, I met the girl that was to become my wife. And she didn't drink. Her dad was an alcoholic, and she wanted nothing to do with drinking. And here I am, sober guy, and we were young, and we fell crazy in love. We had the kind of relationship I've only seen in movies, just inseparable. And so much so that within a few months, she informed me I was going to be a dad. So now I'm 17, newly sober, with a baby on the way. And at that age, I just said, we're going to get married and have this baby and live happily ever after. And I was going to step up, I was going to work hard. And, I don't know how most people come up with their dreams in life, but for me, I know that as a kid, I would lay in that trailer at night and I would think, someday I'm getting out of this trailer park. And I dreamed about having a life like I saw on TV, and I saw other people have, and I always dreamed about being a good husband and a good dad, the kind of dad that I didn't have growing up. And like opposite of what I grew up with, that's what I wanted for my future. And so I was going to step up and do the right thing, and so we did. We got married, and And our daughter was born, and I worked really hard. And now, this drinking thing has been solved. I don't really need AA, thank you. And, I'll pop in once in a while when it's convenient. But I've got this family to take care of, so I'm working a lot of hours, and I'm commuting. And I was sober for, I don't know, about a year and a half, something like that. And one day I went to work, and somewhere between work and home, I was drunk. I never planned it, never saw it coming, and I was drunk. And I got home, and that's not what this young wife of mine signed up for. And within a couple of days, the family car was sitting in an impound lot because I got a DUI. The job was gone, and I'm disappearing for 2 or 3 days at a time. And I hope I never forget that the amount of pain that I cause the people that love me the most when I take a drink. Because that's what I do when I drink. I don't set out to do those things, but that's what always happens when I drink. And I don't know how long I drank that time. I think it was a couple of months. All I know is I drank right up until I thought she was going to leave me. And when I thought she was going to leave, I ran back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that started a cycle that for the next 18 years, I went in and out of the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, dying from alcoholism. And over those 18 years, it's like you'd expect. It was in and out of jails and hospitals and treatment centers. And I am described throughout the book. When I drink, I'm seldom mildly intoxicated, but usually more or less insanely drunk. I'm a tornado roaring through the lives of others. And I most relate in the book where it talks about that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Because when I sober up, I get my driver's license back, and I go to work every day, and I coach my kids in sports, and I try to do everything right. I pay my bills, I help around the house, and I try to clean it all up, and I build up my life again, and then ultimately I drink again. And I tear it all down over and over and over. And sometimes I get 30 days sober and get drunk, and sometimes I get a couple of years. And I drag my family through that for years, for 18 years. And the longest I was ever, I hesitate to call it sobriety, but I went one time just short of 7 years, a couple weeks short of 7 years without drinking. And during that 7 years, I built up a really good life for myself. I had started a business that was having some real success. We had a nice home. I'm coaching my kids in sports. My marriage was good. Everything was good. I built up a really good life. And at the end of this 7 years, now I never saw this wife drunk, ever. She just, out of respect for me, and she didn't care about drinking, she just didn't really drink. She would occasionally have a toast at a wedding or a glass of wine or something, but she just really didn't drink. But this one night, she and I were headed to go into a party, and on the way to this party, she said, "Hey, do you mind if I get some wine coolers?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." And we stopped, and we got her a 4-pack. They sell them in a 4-pack. I'd never seen such a thing. We bought her a 4-pack, went to the party, and even worse, at the end of the night, there were 2 left in the 4-pack. And we put them in the trunk of the car. Apparently, that's where unused booze goes. I did not know that either. Is this mine? Thank you. And so we put the 2 leftover wine coolers in the trunk of the car and forgot about them. And a couple of weeks goes by, and she and I were in our living room one night, and we just had an argument, so like husbands and wives sometimes have, just an argument. But it started to get a little heated, kind of loud, so I decided to walk outside and just let things calm down. I'm sitting out on my front porch, and I had a passing thought. I remember those wine coolers in the trunk of the car. I'm 7 years sober. I've got a great life. I haven't been thinking about drinking. I haven't struggled with it. I hadn't thought of a drink in a long time. It was just a passing thought. And the next thing I know, I'm over there with my key in the trunk of that car, tipping back a wine cooler. 7 years gone, just like that. If you're new, it's my experience. No steps, no service, no sponsor, no chance. No chance for a guy like me. If I'm not treating my alcoholism, I'm always going to drink again. That's been my experience. We also have a saying here, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. I think blowing 7 years on a wine cooler is exactly what they mean by that. But within about 15 minutes of that wine cooler, I found myself at the liquor store buying that big bottle of vodka, 18-pack of beer. And 2 weeks from that wine cooler, I'm being stuffed into the back of a police car for DUI number 4. And over the next 3 years, I never drink successfully. I'm not a good drinker, not at all. But over that next 3 years, something had changed. And no matter how bad I wanted to stop, I could not stop. Drinking against my own will, drinking after making promises to the people that I love the most, the people that I don't want to hurt, promises that I meant with everything in me. Today I won't drink. Today I'm not going to do it. 30 minutes later, I'm doing it over and over. And the only description I've ever heard that really describes the way I drank over that 3 years was by Dr. Bob. He called it that frightful drinking. Because it got really bad, and I just could not stop. Always in the past, when things would get bad, I'd go to a meeting and I'd stop drinking. And this time, when things would get bad, I'd go to a meeting, and then I'd stop at the liquor store. And I could not stop drinking. And during that time, it got bad enough. My wife went to Al-Anon, and I thank God she went to Al-Anon. I always acknowledge if there's any Al-Anons in the room, I would not be standing here tonight if it wasn't for the example I saw right there in my own home of the 12 steps working in her life. That really brought me to my knees. Always up until she went to Al-Anon, she would fight with me about my drinking. Well, that's a good excuse to head out the door and go drink. And when she went to Al-Anon, she stopped fighting with me. She treated me like the sick guy that I was. And she didn't fight with me at all. She didn't mention it. And I could see the pain that I was causing in my house. And so that guilt and that shame, that remorse was eating me alive. And at one point, things were getting really bad, and I went to my wife one day and I said, hey, you're too good for this. Why don't you just leave me? I was at that jumping off place that the book talks about. I was ready to go on and just drink myself to death. And I said, you're too good for this. Why don't you just leave me? And I'll never forget her response when I said that. She looked at me with the sweetest look I'd ever seen in a person's eyes, and she said, it's because I love you. And she started patting me on the center of the chest, and she said, I know what's in here is good. She said, there's a good man in here. And she said, when I married you, I said in sickness and in health, and I'll never leave you for being sick. And then she wanted to describe what it was like being married to me. She said, I lay in that bed every night and I cry myself to sleep night after night. I lay in that bed at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning waiting for that knock at the door. I know that knock's coming. And she said, I put our kids to bed. I get the kids up in the morning. I get their backpacks together. I feed them breakfast. I take them to school, and then I go to work, and I take care of our kids, and I pick them up from school, and I help them with their homework, and I cook them dinner, and I bathe them, and I put them to bed. And they always have that question, where's my dad? And she said, and then I go back to that bed, and I cry myself to sleep one more time. Talked about how lonely she was and how painful it was, and she said, but I'll never leave you for being sick. And I had no idea what it was she could see in here that was any good, because by that point I absolutely hated everything about me. I hated myself. And I don't know how long, I drank a little while after that, but what I found was that there is not enough booze in the world to drink that away. Every time I drank, I could hear those words. I could see that look in her eye. Every time I drank, I could not drink it away. And so short time after that, maybe a couple of months after she said that, was October 4th, 2006. And when I started this talk, I described that date as a gift. I describe it that way because it absolutely is. I didn't pick that day. I didn't know that was going to be the day. And I think I've always liked what Larry T. says. He said his last drunk wasn't his worst when it's just the one that drank away the debate. Because October 3rd was just another night of drinking like every night was. And I woke up on October 4th, and for the first time in my life, I conceded to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic. For the first time I could see the truth. That morning, for the first time, it was not my dad's fault. It wasn't the trailer park. It wasn't her. It was, I have alcoholism. And I knew that it was never going to change. I knew I was going to continue to wake up in that same condition, doing the same things, and I knew it was never going to change. And I laid in that bed that morning, and I hope I never forget, I begged to God that I didn't even believe in for one day sober. One day. Because it had been a long time since I'd gone a day without drinking. And I laid in bed that morning, and it was a profound experience. It was like, I don't know, I just started remembering things that I had long since forgotten, just these random things. Like, it was like watching a movie, like little clips of my movie backwards. And it was like I remembered exactly what it felt like to wake up on a concrete floor behind bars. Roll of toilet paper under my head for a pillow. And not even know what the charges were because I'd been in a blackout. I remembered exactly how that felt. Another thing I remembered that morning was I was always really, really close to my grandmother. And the reason for that is because when I was a kid growing up and it didn't feel real safe at my house and there wasn't dinner on the table and it was filthy, Grandma's house was always clean and there was always a meal on her table. And she never told me no, and she would just come and pick me up, and I adored my grandmother. We were super close. And that morning I remembered what it felt like to see her on the other side of a thick piece of glass. talking to me on a filthy county phone. I remembered the heartbreak in her eyes. And another thing that I remembered that morning was a morning not so long before that, I had woken up in that same condition. And when I got up, I found a note slid under my bedroom door. And when I unfolded this note, in the writing of a child, it says, "Daddy, please stop drinking, I'm scared." From my little girl. She went on in that letter, I don't often tell this, but she went on that letter and talked about how she would be a good girl, like as if it was her fault. Talked about how she would go to those meetings with me, and man, I never wanted to do that to my kids. And I just remembered all these things, all these things, and I just made a decision to come back to Alcoholics Anonymous, convinced it wouldn't work. I'm the guy that comes in, you see him, you guys come and you get your lives together, and I'm the one that can't do it. But that's the only place I've ever had any success, so I decided to come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I came back and I didn't drink that day, and then it was a week, and then it was a month, and it's always been my experience. If I can come back to meetings and stop drinking, the circumstances in my life get better. I stop going to jail. I show up to work. I do, things start to change, and that's what was happening. But this time when I was 5 months sober, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. And that's not how this is supposed to go. 5 months sober. I was 5 months sober when she was diagnosed, and when I was 9 months sober, she passed away. And I didn't take a drink. I'm a guy that takes a drink over every nickel and dime excuse you could ever come up with. And yet I walked through that experience and I didn't drink. And it was always my dream to be a good husband and a good father. It truly was. It's all I ever really wanted to be. And believe me, I wanted to do it a lot longer than that. But because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I got to be a good husband to my wife at the time that she needed me the most. She didn't miss a single dose of medication. She was at every doctor's appointment. Her clothes were clean. Her sheets were clean. She was very well taken care of. So that's why when Scott calls and says, "Can you talk at our group?" You bet. You mean to make the coffee, stack the chairs. I have a debt in Alcoholics Anonymous I could never repay. And after my wife passed away, it was like the beginning of my life just fell apart. I was devastated. I mean, obviously, I was grieving, I was devastated, and I just watched my life crumble because the best I could do was sit in 3 of your meetings a day and not drink. I knew if I was sitting in that chair, I wouldn't hear a single thing that was said, but for that hour and a half, I wouldn't drink. And maybe I'd go home and then I'd take care of my kids, and then I'd come back to the meeting, and I'd go to the happy hour meeting, and then I'd follow my sponsor around. I just lived in these meetings. I couldn't focus on my business. I couldn't do anything else. Just a day at a time, get to that meeting and don't drink. And so that's what I did, and in the process of that, it was like I was paralyzed. I watched my life crumble. I had to close the doors on that business that I had some success with. They foreclosed on my home, repossessed my cars. I went completely broke, and my life fell apart. And it was an incredibly painful experience, but at the end of the day, after that first year, I was sober. I was still sober. And so after a year of my life going that way, I decided to try to start rebuilding my life, and I got a new job, and I was making decent money again. My kids and I had rented a new place, and trying to put my life back together. And then I thought, well, the only thing I need now is a relationship. There's always laughter in the room when I say that. So I met someone, and we started dating, and we had the sickest, most tumultuous love-hate, even by AA standards, sickest relationship you have ever seen. And then we got married. That didn't fix it either, by the way. That relationship lasted 6 years, and it was, we got married by the judge. My buddy, who's an attorney, Mario, he says, "You got married by the judge?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You should ask for a jury." I was in that relationship for 6 years, and I just couldn't let go. It was, over that 6 years, I was manipulated, I was isolated, I was lied to, I was lied about, I was cheated on, I walked on eggshells day in and day out. It was brutal, but I could not let go. I just couldn't let go. We'd have those big fights, where all the neighbors are out in their driveways looking, and I'd say, "That's it, I'm never going back, I'm done with this." And then, she'd come back with another set of promises, another set of apologies, and I think, this time it's going to be different. And I go back for another round. And as a result of that relationship, my favorite saying now is, let go or get dragged. Because I was getting dragged. And after 6 years of living that way, I woke up one day and I said, I did not get sober to feel like this. And I was able to walk away. But I walked away heartbroken, devastated again, and full of resentments. And our book says that resentments are the number one offender for a guy like me. And I don't ever want to drink again. I don't ever want to see that look in my kids' eyes ever again. And I am full of resentments. I'm toxic. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm losing weight. I am constant thought, just ruminating thoughts. I would go to the meetings and people would ask, how you doing? I'd tell them. Like, be prepared for a long talk. Their eyes are rolling back of their head. Oh, it was bad. My buddy Pat says I put on the AA clown suit for a while, but but I didn't drink. I walked through it. I continued to show up to my home group. I continued to call my sponsor. I continued to do these things. And I'm trying to overcome these resentments because I'm so afraid that I'm going to drink. And so I keep being told, write this inventory, get to that fourth column. You know, for lack of a better term, what's my part? I don't really like that term, but what's my part in this? And I could not understand, what did they want me to see in this? I didn't cheat, she did. I wasn't the one lying, she was lying. I was trying to be a good husband. I could not understand, what's my part in this? I deserved it, I caused it. Couldn't understand what it was they wanted me to see in this fourth column. But this resentment is killing me. So I kept trying, and I'm writing one more inventory. This was months. And I am so much pain, and I'm writing one more inventory, and I got to that fourth column, and all of a sudden it hit me. I realized, oh my God, I was a grieving widower. I was in so much pain. I was in so much fear. I became widowed at 36 years old, and I remember thinking, you know, I'd never been alone, and I thought, how am I going to raise these kids alone? How am I going to do this? And I realized what they wanted me to see is not, you know, that I was responsible for her actions or that I deserved that. Nobody deserves that. What they wanted me to see is where I'd made decisions based on self, which placed me in a position to be hurt. That's all they were asking me to see. And when I was able to see that truth, and let's be clear, all the red flags were there from day one. I painted them green. That's on me. And when I had that realization, that resentment that was killing me started melting away. And it took time. It didn't go away overnight, but it started getting better. It's been now, I think, 12 or 13. No, it's been longer than that. I don't know. It's been 12 years or so since I've seen her. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to go meet her for lunch. But I have absolutely no ill feelings towards her whatsoever. And I didn't think that day would ever come. So, enough about my pink cloud in early sobriety. Now, before I scare all the newcomers out of the room, there's a happy ending to this, I promise you, because in the last 18 years, there have been so many things that have happened in my life, and I'm one drink away from missing them. I'm one drink away from missing that day that I got to walk my daughter down the aisle at her wedding. I'm one drink away from missing it. A few months after my daughter got married, she came over to my house, and I was sitting on my back patio, and she brought me a gift bag, and I opened this gift bag, and it wasn't my birthday or anything, I didn't know what it was for, but when I opened it up, there was a card, and when I opened the card, at the bottom it said, "Congratulations, Grandpa," letting me know I was going to be a grandpa. And when I read that, I thought of one of my dear friends and a hero of mine in AA was Patty O. And I thought of Patty, when she would talk, she would always talk about being in the room when her grandson Eden was born. And when he was born, she looked into his eyes, and she was looking into the eyes of God. I love that story that she would tell. So when I read that card, I thought, 9 months from now, I'm going to be looking into the eyes of God like Patty. And so I paced the floor for the next 9 months. And my phone rang, and my daughter said, "Dad, it's time." And I beat her to the hospital. And when they put Logan in my arms, my first grandson, my first grandchild, they put Logan in my arms, I'm ready for that patio moment. I look into his eyes, and I look into his, I mean, he's got beautiful eyes, but come on, it's not the eyes of God. For just a second, I thought, Patio lied. And I never want to paint the wrong picture here, because I was really grateful. It was a beautiful experience with my grandson. I wasn't the least bit disappointed in him, but I was disappointed in me. Like, why can't I seem to find this power? Why can't I have that feeling like Patty had? I've gone to churches and I see people that they feel something, that like they're raising their hand, they feel something that I've never felt. Even that in that experience, and I just thought, man, what is it with me? And about that time, I happened to glance over at my daughter, and And when I did, I looked into my daughter's eyes, and I was looking right square into the eyes of God. The way that my daughter was laying in that bed, standing there, watching me, standing there holding her son, and she was so happy for me, and just, I don't know, she looked beautiful. And when I looked back at Logan, I was indeed looking into the eyes of God. And I remember when I had that experience, I looked up and I just said, thank you, God, for putting me right here, right now. Thank you for that my daughter didn't have to call some bar looking for her dad or hoping I would be here. She knew I'd be here. I'm one drink away from missing that. And when I talk like this, I always talk a lot about my family, and I do that because my family suffered the worst of my illness, and they deserve the best of my recovery. And at the top of a very long list of things that I have to be grateful for, I am most grateful for the relationship I have with my kids. As a result of coming here and doing a whole bunch of stuff that made no sense to me, and I did not think it would work. The sponsor, he never understood. I'm like, did he not hear me? And then they tell me to read this book. This book has the answers, and I'm reading this archaic book. Hampshire Grenadier, something about a dog roll. What's a dog roll? G-Ma, ain't it grand the wind stopped blow? I did not understand why they wanted me to read this book, but I continued to do it. I continued to show up and stack the chairs and make the coffee and do all those things. And as a result of that, I get to have these beautiful experiences. Because it turns out it actually does work. It really works. It always works. About 7 years ago, I think it was, my son was getting married, and he came over to my house and handed me one of those gift bags. I'm like, I know about these gift bags. But this one, he had a plaque made, and there was a picture of he and I when he was small, and the writing, it said, the only thing better than having you as my dad is having you as my best man. I'm one drink away from missing it. I repeat that a lot, and I don't repeat it just because it's some catchy little phrase that I like. I repeat it because I am crystal clear that I am one drink away from missing everything good and decent in my life. Because I come here and do this stuff that makes no sense, I get to stand next to my son at his wedding and be his best man. A couple more stories I'll share real quick. I mentioned that letter that my daughter wrote. Well, first my grandmother. I mentioned my grandmother, how close I was with her. And when I was 2 years sober, I just realized she was in her 90s and she was getting older and she couldn't see too good anymore. And I just, I'm 2 years sober now, and I thought, man, I want to spend all the time I can with her. And so my kids and I came up with a plan that once a week we would pick up Grandma for dinner. And the first time we did that, we pulled into the parking lot of the restaurant and we got out. And I walked around to her side. I wanted to help her up on the sidewalk so she didn't trip. And I didn't think anything of it. I'm just obviously helping my grandmother up on the sidewalk. And when I did that, she stopped and she squeezed my hand and she looked up at me and she said, whenever you're around, I feel safe. Same woman that made me feel safe as a kid. And when she said that to me, what flashed into my mind is her on the other side of a thick piece of glass. And how do you get from there to here? By getting in the car, by showing up and calling that sponsor and saying that prayer, even though you feel like you're talking to yourself, by continuing to do these things in spite of how I feel, trying to take the next right action, and continuing to do that, I got to make my grandmother feel safe. And another story I have like that I like to share, because I have the drunk experience and the sober experience. I had mentioned that letter that my daughter wrote begging me to stop drinking. When I was 7 years sober, she wrote another letter, and it was actually a nomination for a Father of the Year award for the Inland Empire, which is Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And it's a huge area, and a lot of men were nominated for this based on these letters from our kids. And it was put in the newspapers and on social media, and people were supposed to vote on who they thought should win based on these letters. And that letter, she didn't hide my alcoholism. She talked about it. She talked about how scary it was and how difficult it was. And she said, but then he met these people. And she talked about how I came here with you. And then she talked about how our lives started to change. And then she talked about how she watched me take care of her mom in her dying days. How I coached her in sports, the kind of grandfather I was. I now have 6 grandkids, by the way. 5 boys, 1 girl. They finally got it right. But that letter, she talked about how I coached her in sports. And she said, he's the one person I can always count on. And then people started voting on it based on these letters, and a lot of men were nominated, and a lot of beautiful letters. And it got down toward the end, and she called me one day, and she said, "Hey, Dad, you're in the top 3." And I couldn't believe it. Like, what an honor. And a couple days later, she called, and she said, "Congratulations, you won first place." I'm one drink away from missing it. I got to tell you guys, if I didn't get anything else out of Alcoholics Anonymous, if the only thing I got was that letter from my daughter, I could never repay you. It's a beautiful letter. I mean, that's really the prize. I didn't really care who won. I got the letter. So the one area of my life, I've always been involved with a really active group in Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember I used to sit on a bar stool thinking about things I'd love to do in life, and I could never get off the bar stool and do any of them. And when I got sober, I thought, man, the party's over. The party'd been over for a long time. But in my mind, it's like, how am I ever going to have any fun again? I hadn't had fun so long. And as a result of getting sober, my life has become this big experience of going, what's the name of this? We're not a glum lot group. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. And I found people, a pocket of enthusiasm, people that believe in getting in the car and not just going to meetings, but going to baseball games and concerts and pool parties and road trips and going to conventions and doing all this stuff in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it built up this really good life. And I've had experiences where times I've made tons of money, and at times I was barely getting by. Times I was in a relationship and times I didn't have a relationship. Whatever, but continued to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and have this good life, and I've got this great family, and I built up a good life, but the one area of my life that had never really worked out was the relationships, and I'm a hopeless romantic, and I always wanted that great relationship. And so I dated and I got involved with people, but it just didn't work out. And a couple of them were bad experiences, but most of them just weren't the one. I wouldn't say they're failed relationships, they just weren't the one. And I got to a point, a couple of years ago, and I just thought, what am I doing this for? I've got such a great life, I don't even need it. I'm in my 50s now, and a busy, active life, and I love my grandkids. I go to their baseball games and stuff, and I don't need a relationship. And I finally got to that place for the first time in my life where I was comfortable not being in a relationship. And, after a while, I was like, well, man, this is all right. I even went to a couple of concerts alone, and I was like, this is okay, man. Started settling in and really enjoying my life, and I just wasn't struggling with it. Once I accepted it and just settled in, and it was good, and I got real comfortable being alone. And one of my commitments in AA is, for my local convention, I get the speakers. And so a year ago, April, right, I had invited Georgia, who was a friend and one of my favorites at the time, one of my favorite speakers, now my favorite, but was one of my favorite speakers and a friend, but we lived 75, 80 miles apart, so we never really hung out or anything. I would see her from time to time, hear her speak. Friends, but, not close. And but I had invited her to speak at my conference, and she said yes. And one night at the conference, we were all up in the hospitality room. A bunch of people were up there, and they're playing games and having something to eat or whatever. And at some point, Georgia and I sat down, just like two friends, to catch up and have a conversation. She sat across the couch from me, and we started talking. And you're going to make me cry. Stop it. We started having this talk, and within a few minutes, I don't know, there was something about it felt really special. It's just a conversation with a friend, but for some reason, it felt really special. And within a few minutes, I thought, man, I could talk to her about anything, man. I wanted to sit there and talk to her all night, and damn, she's got some pretty eyes. I never noticed that before. And you know where we're headed with this, right? A couple of weeks later, we had our first date, and we, continued dating, and we've been together ever since. And at a time, and she was at a similar place in her life where she had just kind of given up on the idea and was living a big life, sober a long time, we both sponsor people, both active members, and just enjoying her life, going out dancing and going to hear live music or whatever. And it was the same experience for both of us. And it never even felt like it's something that we made happen. It just seemed to unfold. It just seemed to start happening. So we've had this amazing relationship, something like I never even imagined. I'm a hopeless romantic, and I've always dreamed about this great relationship. This far exceeds anything I ever dreamed of. It's the most beautiful relationship. I've never felt so loved. I've never felt so appreciated and connected, and we have the best time. We travel, we go do all kinds of stuff, live music, and just have, like, coming up here tonight was even a blast, just a blast. We laughed, it was just great. We have such a great relationship. I love it so much. And then, so a year later at that same conference, I presented a ring to her and asked her to marry me, and she said yes. So we're just under a month away. We got our marriage license yesterday, and I love her so much I can hardly stand it. Anyway, I'm gonna close with this, and before I say it, I don't want to disrespect my relationship with Georgia because I do adore her. So I asked her one time, I said, does that story bother you? Because if it does, I won't tell it. And she said, absolutely not. Keep telling it. And I think it's important to share it with a newcomer. When I was at the lowest point in my life, in the grips of alcoholism, the person that loved me more than anybody ever had looked me in the eyes, told me she loved me, patted me on the center of the chest and said, what's in here is good. I don't think that's just true for me. I think it's true for all of us. And it was the 12 steps that gave me a little glimpse of what she could always see. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's thank our